So good afternoon. For this session, we are going to just try to stump our panel of experts. So we have a whole slew of slides here. Well, actually, we have two slides. One just saying, hey, we're going to all introduce ourselves, and then the second says we're going to ask questions. So, first of all, let's just pass the microphone up and down and everyone introduce themselves quickly and say what you do.
It's on. That's good. I'm Danny Halfin. I'm on the IT Pro content team. We do all the technical content for Windows in Microsoft, obviously. And myself, I'm in charge of deployment and servicing for Windows.
Hi, my name is Narkis. I'm a principal program manager, and I work as part of the product group that's developing delivery optimization. And I'm a huge fan of peer-to-peer.
Hi, I'm Rob York. I'm a program manager for the customer acceleration team for SCCM and Intune.
I'm Andreas Hammarskjöld from 2 Point Software. I try to tell Narkis what to do. It doesn't always work, but I do my best.
Hey there, Steve Campbell, formerly with MCS for about, 15, 17 years doing deployments and building a lot of the internal collateral and delivery materials for MCS.
I'm Amy Casto. I'm a technical evangelist with Adaptiva, and in between Twitter, I play with Config Manager.
My name is Johan. OS Deployment Wizard, has been doing that for some 25 years now. Also work with Config Manager.
And I'm Michael Nystrom, also the deployment bunny. I have installed Windows many times.
Hold on to it there. And I'm Mike Niehaus, Director of Marketing on the Windows commercial team, and I think the normal quote for deployment people is, we watch progress bars over and over and over again. We're really good at that. So with that, let's shift to questions. Pretty much any question you want to ask. Obviously, we have experts on a few different areas focused on deployment and servicing, so if you ask us the meaning of life, we're probably going to tell you to go away, but anything that is reasonably in that category is fair game. We might not be able to troubleshoot issues, so if it is a detailed technical issue, we'll give you your email we'll give you whatever. Email us and we'll try to follow up later. So, find a microphone and ask questions, because if you don't, we're going to be very bored for the next 75 minutes. We'll start up here.
Hey, what's up, guys? All right, like most organizations, we have a migration to Windows 10 in the works. We would like to run through the deployment by identifying specific business units, targeting communication to that group, and then proceeding with the deployment. What's the best way to capture the organizational structure of my company into dynamic SCCM collections?
Oh, I can answer that. You can do it in many ways, but I like to start with volunteers. That means that the first generation you deploy, besides the proof of concept, which is the IT department, of course, because they're going to be the guinea pigs anyway, you volunteer. That means you publish the task sequence for all the computers that are okay to be installed upgrade. And then you send a note to people and say, hey, there's a new version of Windows 10. This is awesome, has the newest features. You wait for a couple of days, weeks, and most likely between 10 and 35% of all the people will actually install the new version of Windows, if that is the type of company. So that's number one. Number two, another way is to say, let's handpick people. Let's pick people that are natural leaders in an organization. You look like a leader, so we're going to pick you. And then you create this special task force. It's called the New Windows Special Task Force, and they all get a badge. And they're going to be a member of this secret club, and they're going to get the new version of Windows 10. They will automatically brag about that for everybody else. I have the new version, you don't have that. And that's going to kick off other people to want to have that. Now, that doesn't solve everything, so the next step will be to force people to have that. And this is the fun part. You can either do department by department. That's usually a simple trick because that's going to cover all the department specialized applications. So that means that you need to divide a department in maybe 2 steps, the small group and the larger group. You run the small group, then you fix issues, and then you do it for the large group, and then you do the same thing, depending on how you do this. But everything is about creating waves. We don't want to have the big bang thing that, Monday morning everybody is going to have the new version of Windows, and I'm going to be in support, and I have a vacation. Bye. That's the way to fix it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is if you look at what you're basically suggesting, normally that's a user-based thing, and you don't deploy OSs to users, you deploy OSs to machines. So you kind of get into that multi-hop challenge of, first, how do I represent my employee organization into Config Manager? Well, you can do that. You can input through a variety of different mechanisms, even feeding it DDRs to map users to organizations, but then you had to map users to computers in order to figure out which computers then belong into those orgs. You can do that. It is a lot of work. I think it's better to just do more of a sampling-based approach and assume that your sampling-based approach is going to kind of naturally get a different collection of people from different organizations as you go through wave after wave. Okay.
This is a question for all the experts using the modern driver management methodology that's just come out recently. In the past, the applied driver package step was most recommended because you have the most control. But it was also recommended to use the database, the driver database in Config Manager to validate drivers. So what I want to know is if you're going to switch to the modern driver methodology, as it's called, do you still want to use the database, maybe not use it, or just use it for validation?
So the idea of using standard packages instead of driver packages instead of importing, there is actually one thing you do lose, and you lose the validation of the drivers. So if you're unlucky, you will accidentally put a broken driver in that package, and you won't realize that until you try to deploy it, obviously. And then you have to go back and fix that. Now, drivers can be validated in many other ways. For example, the MDT standalone platform has a fantastic driver validation thing in it, and it's actually super fast. It's about 9 times faster, the one that you have in Config Manager. So you can, in just a few seconds or a minute maybe, validate the drivers that way to see if there are any broken stuff. But otherwise, that is a benefit. In the beginning, we imported drivers a lot to be able to search and edit inside Config Manager. What we found after a few years, not many customers are actually doing that. They just add more and more drivers to that repository. It just becomes bigger and bigger. Nobody ever cleans it out because it's pretty complex to do that cleanup unless you do it into PowerShell. So for simplicity, we have started to use this still per model-based approach, normal packages. But if you want to import them, you can still call DISM by using the new option in 1706 that allow you to, even if you do use apply to driver package, you check the DISM box and it will call the same command. So even if you use the workaround that was introduced by Frank Royas from the beginning, or if you continue to use driver packages with a checkbox, it will work. So I hope that answered the question.
Thanks.
To the next mic then.
Yes, a short answer. Way to validate the drivers is very simple. You actually install the drivers, and then you use PowerShell to export the drivers. If you could install them, I'm pretty sure they work. So then you export them and create a package based on that.
So I guess this isn't really a question per se. I'm just kind of looking for comments. So we've heard about a lot about modern management and kind of the whole vision for Microsoft 365, kind of the beginning of this conference. But I feel like there's still kind of a disconnect between where we're at with current branch and kind of how we can all kind of as Config Manager admins kind of move our current environments into a more modern and agile deployment methodology. So instead of delivering applications, in the image, you're doing it all self-service, for example. Or if you need to deliver app sets, then you use a front end to, kind of configure which departments or which users get kind of which applications in their task sequences. I'm just kind of, just looking for comment on kind of, is there any direction about where we can take our environments currently, where maybe autopilot would be cost prohibitive for any reason, or
So basically, what's your path to modern?
Yeah.
I think I can probably answer that. So it's feedback we've heard from a very large number of customers, and over the past few months we've been building up to what we announced on Monday, co-management. And it fits the bill of the scenario you're describing exactly. You have SCCM today, you have this desire to get to Intune for modern management. How the hell do you get there? We basically before, the process was go ahead and recreate everything that you have in SCCM, in the cloud, and you're good to go. And funnily enough, customers said no. So what co-management allows us to do is it allows you to manage the device from both SCCM and Intune, something we previously prevented. So if you installed the SCCM client on an Intune enrolled device, we'd go and unregister that device with Intune. And the main reason for this was policy conflict. So we didn't want people setting a 4-digit PIN from SCCM and a 6-digit PIN from Intune. Which one should win? So we deregistered the Intune agent and we just left you to run with SCCM. What co-management provides is a bridge to get you from current state to modern state. So by not placing the Intune agent in that read-only state, we will enable you to start moving workloads over to the Intune cloud management from the console, from the Intune console. So in the first release of co-management in 17.10, that's going to have things like conditional access and resource access profiles. Conditional access in particular makes a hell of a lot of sense to do from Intune, because if you try and create a conditional access policy in SCCM today, we go ahead and redirect you to the Intune console. So by using co-management, you can actually move the full management of all the profiles and all the access controls up into Intune. Intune will provide those to the agent via the Intune connector, but it'll allow you to continue to manage everything else from SCCM. Over time, we'll provide more and more features that you can move over to Intune to provide you with that bridge. It's not just about the technology, though. It's not just about us providing modern analogies in Intune. It's about IT processes and the way IT is adopted within organizations also modernizing. So Windows Update for Business is another good one that will hopefully be an easy win for a lot of customers, because they're already doing similar processes to what Windows Update for Business has with the rings already on-prem. Because of the cumulative updates, you have that one update per OS, you deploy it, and you effectively have that ring system that Windows Update for Business provides. But for things like applications, there's going to have to be a modernization of the applications, a move to the cloud services, and a move away from the legacy Win32 apps and providing that modern analogy in the cloud. So it's partly technical, and we'll provide that bit for you, but it's also about looking at how you can modernize the processes to adopt those modern technologies from Intune.
We're also doing some things with Autopilot, kind of on the same line of thinking, that we need to provide more stepping stones for you to get from traditional to modern by doing things like saying, well, you don't need to use Autopilot with Azure Active Directory, you can use Autopilot with Active Directory. Then you start throwing in Config Manager and Intune and all of these other tools together to give you a path over time to get to that modern world.
And that's a good point. Modern provisioning via Autopilot is a very viable solution to a lot of customers, and they're starting to look at that simply because it streamlines their approach. Today, they're spending time, money, and effort maintaining and managing images that they then receive the devices from the manufacturer. They then spend time, money, and resources re-imaging those devices. Perfectly good devices before they put their version of Windows on, but they wipe and reload anyway. They then spend time, effort, and resources configuring and white glove service that device to give it to the user. On the other side of the fence, mobile device management, they just ship the device to the user takes off the cellophane, turns the device on, enters their Office 365 credentials, they get automatically enrolled into MDM, and the configuration and all the security settings come down and apply. That's a hell of a lot cheaper than what they're doing in their Windows world. So customers are starting to turn to that approach so that they can modernize and embrace user-driven enrollment of their devices. And it gives the user a better experience as well. We're even seeing some customers say that an image-based solution turns off prospective college hires for them. College hires don't want that coffee-stained, muddy, reseller-taped box that someone's set up for them. They want that nice, ozony, fresh smell when they open it and set it up for themselves. So we're working with a number of customers, and if you saw my session on Tuesday, we demonstrated autopilot through to an SCCM-managed device on the internet, which is the main entry point for that modern management and that modern provisioning.
Yeah, I'll just echo there. A lot of the customer and organizations I've talked to have taken on that new provisioning, new management structure for their new hires and for the Win 10 platform all up. So they're kind of leaving SCCM Win 7 as legacy and watching for that to die out. And as they do either new provisioning for new hires, or a lot of the orgs are targeting this new style for their sales force, the folks that are tough to get in, the folks who it's tough to pry the laptop out of their hand to get a swap done. They're pointing some of these new methods to bring them online and kind of test it out before they go broad internally.
Back to the next one.
I'd like to understand the logic why Microsoft changed the Windows Update log from a easily readable text log that you could look at remotely on all machines to this convoluted process where you have to run a PowerShell script and have the symbols installed and then spit out a log file that most of the time is unreadable anyway.
Next question?
Next question. Well, the first thing that we should say is that some of the problems that we've had with using the PowerShell commandlet to format those logs should be better in Windows 10 1709. The challenge that we have is those logs are generated in a binary format that needs to be formatted today using symbols. So to run that PowerShell command, it goes out to a symbol server on the internet, downloads symbols, and does that to format. They're switching in 1709 to more of a tokenized format. So as a result, the formatting doesn't need the symbols anymore. The problem with the symbols is every time we applied a patch, it needed a new set of symbols, and there was always a delay before those symbols were available. Therefore, you'd run the commandlet, and you just get the binary hexadecimal strings that say no data available, which wasn't useful. So with 1709, it should get better, but it is still binary. But we've certainly heard the feedback saying that, yeah, it would be really nice to get a text log file out of that. But hopefully we'll get one step there with 1709, and then we can look at some other options.
All right.
But there's some quite nice things with the new format, though. So we on the coding side actually do work with the log, but so you can actually query it using intelligence that you can really do with a log file. It's hard to ask a log file that's structured text, more like a SQL type query, like show me all the issues that you had in the last month. That you can do in the binary format, and I'm pretty sure eventually that will come to that you can do the same in the PowerShell to filter much more effectively. So we see the log change as a very good thing from a coding perspective.
All right, so you realize it's a pain point that we want it fixed.
Okay, next one back here.
So my question is, during the sessions, during the week, we heard that moving to Windows 10 is, you shouldn't approach it as a project, right? It's a process, right? And typically, right, a project has a start and end date, and you capital ramp up and resource ramp up. Well, if I'm moving to a process, obviously, there's going to be some level of resource ramp up in order to manage that expanded process. So, for example, you bring deployment management, right? App compatibility management, right? Microsoft IT implemented a dedicated team, right, to handle application management. Can you share with us kind of your experiences, Microsoft IT, on the analysis you did to figure out what do our resource levels need to be now to manage this as a process? And what can you share with us? Because we kind of need to take that back to our leadership, saying our lean staffing levels are going to struggle with this process.
Yeah, the first thing I would point out is that Microsoft IT is kind of an interesting case because we broadly deploy insider preview builds. So the application validation team actually goes through a full validation process monthly. So they're not deploying twice per year, they're deploying 12 times per year. They're basically going through that validation process as quickly as possible for as many applications as possible, very frequently. So their staffing is probably not particularly representative. they have a pretty good sized team to go through that pretty quickly just to get quick feedback into the engineering teams. For most organizations, what you're looking at is taking that big deployment project, which you would have probably done over a period of, say, 18 to 24 months, where you would have ramped up to maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 people working on that project. And now you're just turning it over on its side. And you're saying you're still going to put in the same amount of work, but spread over a multi-year period. So the question becomes, what's the incremental headcount increase needed to maintain that ongoing? Because yes, you're constantly going to be doing this because you're always piloting one release, broadly deploying another release, using a third release. So it continues in that cycle constantly. I would say that we get a lot of questions from customers who say, well, can we reduce our headcount? Not a chance. The question really is, how much do you need to increase over time? I mean, it's going to average out overall. We hope that by deploying more quickly with smaller amounts of change, with high levels of compatibility, that it's not a large incremental increase, but it could be an additional person who's now responsible for doing deployment, an additional person that's responsible for doing, or really for coordinating that application validation. The testing side of it, we hope, is minimized. I mean, the hope isn't that you're testing every single application. The hope is that you're testing truly critical ones, and you're validating the rest just by deploying into a representative population of machines, maybe 10% of the machines in the organization, just to get feedback on how they're working. So minimizing the amount of effort put into that by just having people go about doing their normal jobs. Deploy, see what happens, expand the deployment, see what happens, and just keep working your way out through that process.
And ideally, that app testing is automated. It's not pulling people off their day-to-day jobs to go test the build du jour or the release du jour. It's using, win runners, app runners, whatever, something that tests those and lights up problems early without people being involved.
Yeah, and the nice thing about automation is you can drop in every single insider build and repeat the automation.
Right.
And if anything breaks, let us know.
Just a quick follow-up to that, though. So again, you got the deployment rings that you have to manage, right? Because we're managing systems, right? And so people get new systems, and then those systems drop out of those deployment rings, and you have to get the new systems in there. Or there's the deferrals, right? The accounting department can't go now, and I have to move them out, right? And then I have to move them back in. Is there any, thought within Microsoft on providing guidance, say, if you have this many endpoints and this many applications and your staffing level is X, you kind of spit out a formula saying, this is where you kind of need to make an adjustment within your organization. Because that would be very helpful to us. Because our challenge with our leadership is, show me the metrics, right? Just don't tell me you need more people. I need metrics to support that argument.
I would love to have that. The problem is that when I work with customers, last 2 weeks ago we actually were to a customer and they never heard about Hyper-V. They actually never heard about virtualization. They never heard about anything that happened the last 20 years. And the problem is that if I tell them that this is how you automate application test and verification, they don't even know what a virtual machine is. How can I explain that for them? So I think it's hard for Microsoft to create such numbers because it depends on how you work. At the same time, I go to a customer that says, well, we automated everything. We download the ISO image, we build everything out of that, we install and package the application, we test and verify the application, it spits out okay. And then we just deploy it. And it works 99%. So how much time do you spend on that? Well, it took a month to create a PowerShell script. Now I'm watching TV. So that's why it's so hard to give numbers. I would love to have that, but it depends on the knowledge of the people that actually does it. Yeah, and the maturity. Never heard about Hyper-V. Oh, God.
And maybe one thing that I wanted to add is one thing that we're doing on our side is Windows Analytics. We have cloud-based tools to allow you to get a foreshadowing of what you're going to get with your apps and your types of hardware. And kind of get a picture. It's not 100%, but it's something you should look into when you're trying to deploy new versions of Windows.
Yeah, and the biggest thing in Windows Analytics is it will tell you which machines are ready, which machines don't have any issues. All right, we'll take that group, feed it to Config Manager, and deploy it. Then, as we're working through the rest of the applications resolving issues, we get another list. Add them to Config Manager, deploy it. So you can get into that cycle. Start back up front here. They weren't there before, so we'll do another one here, and then we'll circle back around.
All right. My question is there any work being done within Microsoft to improve the Windows deployment systems, PXE, built in to use a newer protocol than TFTP that might be a little faster or more reliable?
It's almost like you were planted by Andreas to be in the crowd.
So the question is, any more modern type network boot stuff coming from Microsoft? Not that we know of. I mean, Microsoft is quite busy at the moment with the whole other paradigm to that, which is basically to autopilot, which removes a large proportion of the need to do network boot stuff. There is things that will come in UE5, 2.5, and 2.6 where I think Microsoft has probably been waiting a little bit to see if that is something that they can build on. Then again, like doing a lot of that coding is really, 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 really complicated and really hard to maintain. And so if you look at what the other tech giants have done, they basically use some of the actual open source things like iPXE and use that to build on because it's the de facto standard. So large companies like that you use servers from them every day, those servers were booted using iPXE. So at the same time, I'm not sure that it would be smart by Microsoft to go in and to build something to compete with that. It might be better that they just try to use it instead.
Yeah, so it's certainly possible to use WDS with iPXE to do faster PXE downloads like using HTTP instead of TFTP.
Yeah, so on our software blog, we have a pretty good video of how to do it with iPXE on going from WDS. But in a way, you typically don't even need that. And with UEFI 2.5, you can actually do an HTTP boot directly as well. So there's quite a lot of things that you can do without Microsoft having to do anything, actually.
Yeah. As you probably noticed, we haven't put a whole lot of investments into WDS. It's been pretty stable since it was called WDS. So I don't expect to see that change too much. There are some discussions around WDS, but they're not about really adding significant changes to it. So where did we leave off? Why don't we finish the circle and we'll get back out to those guys.
All right, my question is in regards to going from long-term service branch to current branch for business. We're in the process of preparing to move to 1703. And currently we have a solid working process for imaging with LTSB 10240. And we went that direction almost 2 years ago and started deploying Windows 10. And what we're doing right now is we've worked out an upgrade task sequence for 1703, which seems to work great. But when we are trying to use the existing task sequence that works flawlessly with 10240 and replacing the WIM file with 1703, we're noticing that there's differences. Like for instance, Windows doesn't activate, and the out-of-box experience is back. So what we're wondering is there any sort of like run book or best practices when going from LTSB to 1703 that we could potentially look at, or maybe even some predefined task sequences that we can utilize and build off of, since it seems like there are some differences there?
I haven't done any LTSB to 1703 migrations, but I've done a ton of 1703 migrations. And what happens early on that when 1703 was released, it took Microsoft quite a while to get basically deploying working correctly. So it took up was it August update where finally the last OB fixes were in?
I think it was September 25th, there was another release.
Yeah. So basically, the latest version does have a much better story around deployment in general, and they fixed a lot of the issues that happen in the out-of-box experience phase. So basically make sure you are on that one, that you have that image or that update installed in your image before you do the upgrade.
Okay. Yeah. If you're using KMS activation, I wouldn't expect to see activation issues either. The activation is actually preserved by the 1703 upgrade, so that the machine shouldn't even need to reactivate. The fact that you're seeing issues like that requires some investigation. So I'd suggest either opening a support case, or at the very least, there is a licensing diagnostic that you can run that will create a cab file. Email it to me, and we'll figure out how to see what's going on there.
Yeah, it's not really with the upgrade we're seeing the issue, it's when we're doing bare metal. So when we're bare metal imaging a machine, the activation it's not working. So upgrade seems to be fine though.
Using KMS?
No, we're not using KMS.
So how are you activating?
No, I'm sorry, we are using KMS, I'm sorry. So we're just seeing that it just doesn't activate on its own, so we'll have to manually activate at this point. So I guess I'll open a support ticket for that in particular, but more what I was looking for is there, so best practices to use the latest build, but is there any sort of documentation going from LTSB to 1703 or anything that we can read up on, or any kind of blog?
It really shouldn't require anything special.
Okay.
So it's, the UBI one concerns me a little bit. I'll have to try that in the lab and see what happens. But when you do an automated upgrade, which is anything doing setup.exe/auto upgrade, you should not see UBI at all during that process.
Yeah, it's only during bare metal that we're noticing that. When we're trying to deploy the 1703 build with a 10.240 task sequence that we had, and we're trying to build
with
off
that,
of
you may want to just validate the n10.xml. There have been some new parameters added between the original 1507 release and the 1703 release. So, using a later example on a 10.xml might resolve that.
Okay, yeah, that's what my thought was, and that's where we're at currently. So, and since I'm here, I figured I'd ask the question. So, thank you.
Okay.
Hello. We've got a fleet of Windows 10 tablets that only have cellular connections. How do we manage the quality and feature updates given the size and the bandwidth requirements?
Someone want to touch that one?
We have a customer in Sweden. It's I don't know the English word. Municipal. That's like a county but smaller. Yeah. Municipality. Okay. Anyway, they have about 7,500 machines that are on wired network only. So it's a quite a similar scenario. So basically, very low bandwidth to them. They were not pleased to hear the news about Windows 10 when it came, when they realized they had to push 3 gig of images twice a year to those machines, including the monthly gig updates, because back then the Express installation files was not available. Now they are. So for that type of scenario, we typically, the only option we have to our disposal is pre-staging. Peer-to-peer couldn't help us in that scenario because it turned out that all the access points were turned into hubs, basically. So there was no like point-to-point in between the peers, and that's kind of the thing for peer-to-peer. So pre-staging a lot, using various protocols, for example, bits to, in the background, trickle down stuff for a week, 2 weeks, and then hit the deadline. So when working with Config Manager, when you make a required deployment available, it actually will start to download things, but you can have the deadline much later.
Okay.
Yeah, with LTE connections, monthly updates with Express shouldn't be a huge issue, because we're talking 100 megabytes or so or less per month.
Right.
It's the quality updates that are, the feature updates that you need to worry a little bit more about. That should require a little bit more control, because moving 3 gig over a LTE connection is not pleasant.
Yeah, about 17 hours.
So some of the you can do is, like, if you're using branch cache, for instance, you can take you can pre-stage the actual hash data and send them a USB key that they plug in, and you can do that using like a standalone config manager task sequence that just puts the data onto the drive. So when the LTE connection goes up, it just validates the hash, because you might have changed something, but it's pretty good to do the delta and it just do the process that way. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of pain, but it's a lot better than pulling everything over LTE and paying data for it.
Yeah, okay.
Back here.
Just to add on the policies to throttle, if you are on more recent builds of Windows 10, you're going to need to set the bandwidth throttling policies in delivery optimization, because that is what is being used as the default downloader for Windows updates.
A question and a comment. So the first question is on Pixie booting as well. We're looking at Device Guard and some of the features on the newer hardware. So when we turn on Device Guard, we're not able to Pixie boot anymore because it sees it as a change to the BIOS. So as long as we can do refreshes, we'll use that. But in the case that we actually have to rebuild a device, what's your recommendation with Device Guard and a Pixie boot?
I'm not 100% sure that you're referring to Device Guard. It sounds more like secure boot and measured boot, because anytime you change the operating system, the measured boot measurements can change.
Are you disabling secure boot in order to Pixie boot?
So I think HP was the particular model in question, but it was kind of Device Guard turning it on, device and credential guards. We turned that on along with secure boot all in one package. If you try to Pixie boot, we have to actually disable that feature or the combination in order to kind of get the Pixie boot to work again.
There are some I won't call them out. There are some manufacturer that has a very buggy UEFI implementation around that. And basically, if the latest fix doesn't work, and you see that behavior, you send them a nice email and telling them to fix it. Often it's these models come with they came out 2012, 2013, where UEFI had a lot of changes, and there were a lot of buggy versions. Like UEFI works, it's like 2 to 3 manufacturers in the world that deliver the BIOSes to them, or to the firmware, to the major OEMs. So they all run the same code more or less. They have different front end. So one of them was really buggy around 2012, 2013. And typically with our luck, that went out of service or support like around 2015. But a lot of people still use them. So they try to do lots of things with them and it doesn't really work. So that's not the behavior that you should see at all. You should be able to Pixie boot, still using secure boot and all of the security features.
So if the default is that you can actually use that feature with it enabled,
you certainly can. Okay. I mean, the thing is, it's really triggered by secure boot, because when you turn on secure boot, it requires using native UEFI. Prior to having secure boot on, you can have UEFI with BIOS emulation with the CSP active. So when you Pixie boot, you may be using the legacy CSP in that case. As soon as you turn on secure boot, there's no more legacy CSP. It's gone.
To interject, I think HP actually has something called Device Guard that's HP specific and has nothing to do with Microsoft's Device Guard, which adds further complexity to it. It's like their BIOS Guard, they call it Device Guard.
Yeah, I mean, there are some manufacturer that does really strange things. So like it detects if you plug a USB key in or whatever, and just won't boot and just fail. So
yeah, anything that would lock you into a specific bootloader would be a challenge.
Okay, and the comment was we're really advocating for this Windows as a service, and we're trying our best to move, we'll say, our governments over towards this model where everyone wants to keep LTSB. So we're currently looking at deploying 1703, and the very first thing I seen after the in-place upgrade is the little mail icon. So I really wish Microsoft moving forward would please think on an enterprise SKU, stop sneaking these little widgets in maybe in the future that require us to do custom start menu layouts, task menu layouts, and post OOBE scripts to remove such things. So that's my little snippet there.
Okay. No comment needed on that one. Next.
Hello. The Intel management extensions, or Intune management extensions, excuse me. So you had the ability to push PowerShell scripts to devices. Can you speak to anything on where that is now and where that might be going? Are there going to be any further things coming behind that, like the ability to, like maybe some features to help detect, like IP gateway to detect if a machine is on-prem or off-prem, in the cloud, roaming in a hotel, things like that, to kind of help guide where In other words, to act as an application deployment wrapper for big payloads that you don't want to push out of Azure to come from an on-prem distribution point or file server if the machine goes in and out of Office. Am I making any sense?
Mayan had a session earlier where she talked about kind of the next steps.
She did.
I think that goes beyond the next steps that she discussed.
Yeah, so Intune Management Extensions is designed to, in a similar way that co-management is designed to help customers move to the cloud by bridging the gaps, Intune Management Extensions is designed to step up on a few of the shortfalls that the MDM stack has. It's not going to be a recreation of SCCM in Intune. We will definitely be adding more stuff to management extensions. As to what they are or when they will be coming, there's not really that much to share. I'd suggest you go back and look at Mayan's session this morning on co-management. She did cover management extensions a little bit in terms of what the roadmap is, but at the moment it is just that PowerShell support.
With the move to Windows Update for Business that expects each endpoint to talk to Microsoft Update in the cloud individually, what is your answer for the customers that cannot expose their endpoints to the internet? Are they just stuck with SUS?
Yeah, so the whole idea in the cloud is for you to be leveraging the scale that we have on the service side and all the investment and all the innovation that we're doing in the Windows stack to be pulling from the cloud and bringing down these content, the updates. All of this is managed by dedicated cloud services. So having internet connectivity is a requirement. If you have a need for clients that are completely offline, then yes, WSUS is your way to go, or other MDMs or management.
So you don't have any plans to introduce some kind of proxying component that would be able to collect requests from these clients and direct them to Microsoft Update in the cloud and then talk back to the endpoints?
So most of this traffic is not cacheable. It's actual protocols for clients to talk to the services, and therefore that internet connectivity is required.
And it could not be just a pass-through proxy. Just to solve the security concerns those customers may have with exposing everything to the internet.
Yeah, so it definitely works through your proxy if you allow the traffic to go through. However, the idea is you can't actually cache that dynamic protocol through the proxy. Anything that's payload, anything that's cacheable, obviously you can leverage that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think the only requirement we document is the proxy server does need to support byte cache or byte range requests.
But yeah, byte range requests. So that's actually an important point. Most of our download content, if Express, if you're downloading apps from the store, app updates, we bring down just the delta that's necessary, and the way we do that is we use byte range requests out of this massive payload, we bring just a small portion. So in order for this to work well, you have to allow byte range requests, and there's articles that if you wanted to only allow it to specific host names, there's an article out there that you can see which host names are required.
So the reason why I asked about proxying is in the previous versions of Windows 10, earlier releases, we saw that it was possible to just direct the Windows Update traffic through the proxy, but it's no more possible to differentiate in the latest release. So you put everything through proxy or nothing. So any solution for this?
You never saw that.
Never saw what?
And there's certainly a list of hosts that we document for Windows Update and delivery optimization in the store and other services in order to make the proxy configuration work. So it can be done. Obviously, if you redirect everything through the proxy, it's much easier, but you should be able to get it to work if you just wanted the appropriate traffic to go through.
Okay, so just a matter of proxy configuration, no specific support for this.
A generic proxy configuration that directs everything through the proxy should work fine.
Okay, thank you.
So like many customers, I'm sure a lot of people skipped or didn't use Windows 8 or 8.1 very much. So most of our upgrades are going from Windows 7 directly to 10. And in any case, if we have a machine that we reimage that's Windows 7, it goes straight to 10. Well, if they reimage that, it's going to stay legacy. Now they have the BRK3043 tool, which is a good step in the direction, but there's one line in there that says now use the manufacturer's tool to convert, which pretty much don't exist. Lenovo has a PowerShell script that a third party wrote. HP has a toolkit, but depending on the age of the computer, you have different commands that you run. Dell has a whole different set of tools that work or don't work depending on the age of the machine. For me, it's a huge gamble to go down that path, because if that fails and you've converted to GPT, that machine's dead in the water unless you revert it somehow. So what are your suggestions for handling that? Because every time I ask the manufacturers, where's your tool to do this, they look at me with a blank stare. What are you talking about? So I'm curious on what you've seen as real-world experiences with people using this tool and success stories and failures, because to me it's very dangerous. I want to get there because like 90% of our systems are set to legacy, even though 40% of our systems are Windows 10. So it's one of those things where we're already down a bad path, and I'm trying to stop the bleeding, and this is a step, but I don't think it's going far enough.
I think you had a key word in there, and it's experience. That's why a lot of customers who do this work with partners who have built up that experience, working with all kinds of different models of machines and working out the details of how to do that.
I think the real world fact is that we have to test it ourselves. The manufacturers aren't really testing it. I spent a significant portion of this summer doing that very test. So I took the TechNet sequence that you're talking about that has all the documentation, and then there's just a line, use the vendor tools. I created a sequence that has logic for all three major vendors. So you can download it for free on Adaptiva's blog, or you can come up afterwards and come talk to me for the information. I'm not the only third-party vendor that has that, but I believe we all offer it for free.
But can it handle a failure? Because it's one of those things they both have to succeed in order to continue. Because if one works and one fails, you're going to have a dead machine when it reboots.
Correct. So my process was I wanted to make sure that the vendors were telling the truth, that you could automatically convert from BIOS to UEFI. So I tested that first. And then I tested MBR to GPT. And then if I found that one step failed, at least I knew I could revert back or forth from BIOS to UEFI. So I wasn't totally dead in the water. That makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah, and certainly testing with each model of machine is a good idea. And a lot of customers, as part of that process, will also do BIOS updates to make sure that they have the latest behavior as part of that.
And that's part of it is when we acquire a company, I'd love to force them to adapt to our standard, but we can't. So we have like 300 different models spanning 8 years. And some don't even support UEFI, much less secure boot. So, you know, it's like I roll my eyes, but I'm kind of, my hands are tied behind my back. I can't force them to go do anything.
If I were in that position, number one would be to pick them one machines that actually work. I mean, we talk about old UEFI firmware, so just get rid of everything that is weird machines that, you know, they have like a experimental version of UEFI. That's not going to work either, so it doesn't matter. Get away from those machines. You need to have the specific models because you need to test on them. That's very simple. Another thing we have done is that in some cases we made a decision to do the Windows 7 to Windows 10, and we don't change from BIOS to UEFI. We do that as another task sequence that happens later on. So we get the machine up to Windows 10 first, just to make sure that everything like that works, and then you can assign a task sequence later on. Well, another thing is that you can, if you're using task sequences, of course, to include backups and say, hey, this, I mean, we had this for a couple of customers. You gather all the machines that are important enough to have the effect of your salary in a group. And for those machines, you perform a backup. So you now got the complete WIM file. That means you can't restore the entire machine, but you have all the data. So that together with UEFI, roaming profiles, all that stuff makes it, because you need to cover for this. If it fails, how do you recover? You need to figure out a way to do that. So you can be safe that say, hey, if it blows up, I don't really mind, I can always restore the data. That's going to be important.
I mean, there was always, since I started in IT, it's been doing deployments. It's been the fewer models you have, the better, easier life is. And it's never been more true than this year, or these years when we're running Windows 10, because it's not only the BIOS to UEFI conversions, it's also every single upcoming feature upgrade that you apply. There actually are, for example, scenarios where you need new drivers. So you need to redo the testing twice a year on every model that you have. And if you have 300 models, that is no fun. Just finding them is no fun. So what we did for one customer, they didn't have 300 exactly, but I had 296 models. So I would say it's pretty close. We picked about 20 of them. That was like the most of them. And we did the bulk of the work for those. If the other one did not work, well, that was dealt with on a case by case. But we tried to figure out how can we deal with like 80, 90% of the machines automated. To refer to your comment about different BIOS versions, different vendor have different tools for different versions of their hardware. Yeah, that's how it is. You are going to need to use different tools for different devices. But the fewer your models, the better. I did a tech ad back in 4 years ago. We did a pre-con, me and Kent. The 296 model was one end of the timeline. I've never seen anyone with more or worked with anyone with more. The other customer was a 20,000 seat customer. They had 2. And it's easier to support 2 models than the other one.
The other thing that I would add to that is a benefit that we have with the insane amount of hours that we've put into testing things is that we've built relationships with the 3 major vendors. So if you're yelling and bashing your head against the wall, let us know. My experience has been when I come to people at these 3 vendors and say, hey, people are telling me your tools aren't working. They'll look into it and they'll fix it, and often quickly. But you have to speak up. You can't just, oh, this doesn't work, I give up. I also have a running list of machines that I've successfully done this with. So if anybody in here is using the tool or anyone wants to start using it, just let me know and I'll update that list.
I lost track of where we were. I think we're over there.
I have a question about SCCM or ConfigMan education for administrators. So we went from 2012 R2 base to current branch this year.
Good.
Exactly, so we could get to Windows 10. The problem is the disparity between where we were and where we are now. I just saw today, there's a little checkbox in the apply drivers where you can have DISM apply the drivers for you. If I wasn't here to see that, I would have never known that existed. So what I'm looking for is are there some halfway decent resources? Because if you take the Microsoft classes, you're going to get, oh, hey, here's how to do 3 things in ConfigMan. That's it. You know, the classes really aren't oriented towards, hey, this is day-to-day life for an administrator. Here's all the things that you're going to need to know. They're not cookbooks. The classes are really designed to, here, this is the common things that you're going to encounter.
Maybe I'm answering a different question, but the answer I'm going to give, and feel free to correct me if it's not the answer you need. Every release of current branch and also the technical previews, we release, on the day of release, we have the documentation that says what's new in 1606.
Okay.
And that has a full list of all of the major features that have some major impact. There's likely to be a lot more bug fixes and tweaks and improvements, but anything that has a major impact on the functionality of the product, that will be in, first of all, the technical preview release documentation, and then in the current branch, what's new. And I use that on a weekly basis just to refresh my memory as to what shipped when, and also the specifics of the particular feature. So that's a really good place to start, and that will take you on down the rabbit hole into the deeper documentation for each of those features.
And then about 12 hours after that documentation gets posted, all of the community people post screenshots and everything else. So I've gotten into the habit of just having RSS feeds and looking at all their pretty pictures.
And sometimes it's even sooner than that because they've had early access and they're waiting for our director of engineering to give them the go-ahead that they're no longer constrained to NDA. That's right, isn't it?
I know there was also a TAM or a PFE inside the support org that did a lot of video recordings of day-to-day tasks. So, how do I add drivers? And he had built up 300, 400, 500 of those vignettes. Steve Rahi, I don't know if he's here this week, and we were looking to see if there was a way to make that kind of stuff available. But there is, as Mike points out, it usually pops up in the community pretty quick. Everything in one spot, maybe not so much, but it does pop up online pretty fast.
Yeah, I was wondering if TechNet was better than other resources, or is it just, okay, let's Google search, or excuse me, Bing. Bing search, current branch config man or 1607 changes or things of that nature.
So here's the thing. It's about knowing people. I mean, you need to know who knows about Manager. And the same goes if you attend a training. You need to know that the guy that actually runs the training actually tried Config Manager at least once.
Exactly. A lot of them are MCTs who they saw it in a book. Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah, I met a teacher that said, next year I'm actually going to work in the real life. I met him a year later and said, that's horrible. I'm going to go back to teaching because it doesn't work in real life.
The other advice I can give you is if you have any extra hardware at all, even if it's something very minuscule that you don't think is impressive, like Johan's setup that he's always bragging about, is you can run a config manager environment on very limited hardware. Obviously, you're not going to have a lot of fun if you try and plug this in on your corporate network and be like, hey, here's my new site server. But you can get a lot of practical experience using the UI or testing out PowerShell, things like that. So I highly recommend getting some kind of device that you can have a small lab on. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend putting product keys in. It's not a good idea.
Yep.
Voiding licenses. But you do get a trial. So use the trial, and when it's no good, then use his hydration kit and set it up again.
I was going to say, or ask my Tim for another key.
Yeah, so we're a very small subset of the three, or of the people that Michael was talking about that he just has a feed for. So it's typically within hours, if not a day, that we have some sort of blog post available. So if you don't know how to find us, come up here afterwards, and I'll tell you where you can find us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So just to tweak a response slightly, if you're going to set up a small test environment and you only have that one VM, I'd go technical preview. It's free, you can download it, we ship it every single month, and there's a whole host of stuff that we put in there. The number of times customers ask me, hey, what's on your roadmap? Have you looked at the technical preview? No.
Yeah.
The technical preview is our most public and obvious roadmap, because if it's in technical preview, it's going to be coming to current branch at some point, and we're still keen for feedback on that feature that we're going to ship. So technical preview is a fantastic resource for anyone because they can download it, they can install it. Yeah, they need a VM and a domain to run it in, but the actual technical preview code is free, and we will ship you an update every single month.
Awesome.
And if you're like me and you have that technical preview installed and you forget about it for a few months and it expires and you have to reinstall it, go to configurationmanager.uservoice.com and vote up the item to allow you to upgrade one of those expired installs.
As a short comment to end this, we'll answer the question, the last part of the question. I actually asked David James, who is the director of engineering behind Config Manager, can't you just please build every single change you did in 1706? And he goes, well, we did about 3,000, so no. So they do document the most important ones. The community typically follow us with the rest, and yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Next.
My organization's in the middle of performing in-place upgrades from Windows 7 to Windows 10. And I've been asked, how do we perform an IPU for home users without using VPN?
Upgrading home Windows 7 users to Windows 10?
People who work from home, who would normally VPN in, but they don't want to allow the IPU to happen over VPN in fear that they're going to bring down the VPN infrastructure. So they said, can we perform an IPU for our users who are remote but without using VPN. And these users are not, my thought was to create a USB of the OSD task and send it to them, but that requires local admin, and they're not local admins.
So first of all, the question is around in-place upgrade using basically VPN connection. And I was down in manning the deployment booth in the Expo area earlier this week and got the very same question. We have a session tomorrow, me and Michael. It's the very last session of the day, so where we go through different scenarios, how we can trick sequences and offline media and things to support scenarios like that. Problem with VPN, especially if they're user-based, where the user have to log in first and do the VPN connection, the in-place upgrade sequences, they really don't like that. If you can find other ways to get that VPN connection initiated, for example, during an in-place upgrade, there is a set of complete CMD script that runs quite early on in the process. And typically, if you can get a connection working in that phase already, the sequence is going to be quite happy about it. There are also other techniques you can use. For example, even if you're using Config Manager, you can use Config Manager to stage an offline MDT media on the disk. And as long as that folder is named deploy, you can actually kick off a completely local refresh or upgrade of that box without the need to having to do that VPN connection. As soon as the VPN connection comes back to life again, the config manager agent will actually happily reconnect to the site server again, and you can start continue to manage it. Yeah, that's what I've seen.
Well, they want me to avoid VPN altogether, but you just said something that was very interesting about the offline media, copying it locally, and then having SCCM config man kick off the upgrade that way.
Yeah, you still use config manager to put the bits out there, so you get control over that, and you can use your 16 infrastructure. You just use the offline setup, so you don't have to do the connection back, because that's typically where it fails.
And you have a session on this tomorrow, you said?
Yes.
Awesome.
And we have seen other tricks from Microsoft IT and other customers where they've put the bundled media that's necessary on an FTP server, in Azure Blob storage, wherever it needs to be, and download it to the local machine. Config Manager can certainly drive that process, and once everything's local, you can go. That doesn't require a VPN server. It's probably easier if you have a Cloud DP and you just leverage that to download the content locally, and then once it's local, you have a separate process to kick it off.
Thank you.
Back here.
More feedback than question. For reasons we would like to have as less models as possible. So we are installing LTSB on our HP models for mission critical machines. So having a new LTSB release every 3 years is too late for us, because we get new machines with new CPUs each year. So if we would like to use them with LTSB, we have to keep them on stock for 3 years, so we can still use them.
Hence why we say LTSB is for special purpose devices where such a thing is somewhat reasonable to do. In the case of LTSB 2016, it has support up through Skylake processors and Kaby Lake, I think. Yeah, because Kaby Lake is with 1607. So as long as you can continue to buy those through 2019, you're in good shape. For any new processors that come out, like the Cannon Lake machines that will come out probably early next year, those will require waiting until 2019. It's just the matter of the way we support new processors requires us to tweak the operating system in order to get the best behavior. Kind of a case in point for that is if you find one of the new Kaby Lake refresh machines that Intel released very recently, you can buy them now, you can get them through retail channels. If you take one of those and install Windows 10 1607 on it, it blue screens. It doesn't support that particular processor. That processor came out after Windows 10 1607 was released, so that processor will require Windows 10 1703. The new Cannon Lake ones will likely require Windows 10 1709 when it comes out next month. That is not something that will backport to the LTSB release. So yeah, you'll have to be careful with the processors if you're running significant numbers of LTSB machines.
Okay, thanks. One more feedback. Creators Updates 1703 has been released 6 months ago, and we are still waiting for drivers for certain models which are 2 years, 3 years old. Our vendor sells us those clients with warranties for 5 years, 4 years, and we are still waiting for drivers. So what is the commitment of Microsoft, HP, Intel, how to solve those issues?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge because the OEMs have a certain support policy where they'll say, we'll support new operating systems on this device for a particular period of time and provide driver updates. The period of time that the OEMs generally offer that is much shorter than the life of the device for most organizations. So that then means that you get to a point in time and the OEM's going to say, yeah, no thanks, we'll sell you a new machine, but they don't provide any more driver updates. So that's not a very good situation. So Microsoft has routinely taken on the support for those drivers so that we can continue upgrading those machines and keeping them current. It's kind of a service that we perform that's pretty much a thankless service because no one even knows that we do it for the most part in order to make sure that we can keep upgrading those. Because we have the same situation with all these home machines. It's not a commercial-only thing. It's not just a business thing. We've got 500 million consumer machines out there that we need to keep up to date. So we will create updated drivers for the masses. Now, there do come times when we would look at that and say, there's a class of machines out there that's just too old. It's not really a good experience on Windows 10 anymore, therefore we should drop that. We did that with some of the old Atom processors. We announced that a while back. I think it was Clover Trail Atom processors, where the experience on Windows 10 for these devices released back in the Windows 8 timeframe just wasn't good enough anymore. We did drop support for that, and we've pretty much limited those devices then to Windows 10 1607. But that's pretty far out on the life cycle of those chipsets. For most mainstream chipsets, we'll continue to offer driver updates as long as we can.
Okay, thanks.
Back up front.
Yeah, my question is, I work in the healthcare industry, and they are very particular about the applications and programs that are on devices that are introduced to our environment. So we use OSD imaging, so that way we know exactly what's on the device when it comes in. It sounds like with autopilot, that's going to require some OEM support and an expectation that they're going to give a clean device with minimal junk, so to speak. And I was wondering what kind of conversations have been had with them and if they're completely on board with that. And likewise, if you have a customer who's interested in autopilot but are very particular about what goes onto a device, what would you recommend to that organization to prevent, somebody from, getting an OEM device with, antivirus on it that's going to cause issues, or if somebody just goes to Best Buy and gets a bunch of preloaded or licensed software pre-installed?
It depends on how you use this. Autopilot is that package or umbrella or whatever. That means the device comes from the vendor. And it's going to be shipped in the way that the vendor has. But if you use provisioning packages, there's a built-in function called reset the PC. That means that anything that was on that machine is gone, except for drivers. So that means that if the vendor installed OEM software, it will vanish. But that's the local provisioning package. Now, if you get Office 365 power devices and the entire new function they have in the cloud, it depends on the vendor. However, the vendors are obliged to not provide all kinds of software to them. They can't do any kind of modifications. A lot of end users says, a lot of IT pros says, I can't do this modification. No, you can't. Neither can the OEMs. So they can't do that bloating of software that we could see in Vista. Anybody remember that?
Yeah, the OEMs do have requirements to keep the performance of the machine at a certain level when they ship it, so they can't get too carried away, but they do still load plenty of extra stuff. There are signature images from Surface by default, Lenovo commercial devices by default, and HP and Dell will happily sell you, for a little bit of extra money, a clean device as well, so you can certainly do that. If you don't have those options, then the clean PC option with the provisioning package is a good way to reset the machine. It just adds an extra 20 to 30 minutes to the machine setup time because it rebuilds the operating system, wipes all that stuff away. But it gets the machine back to a clean state that you can then use to go the rest of the way.
Okay, so what would be good for us then would be to do that clean and then from there use SCCM to deploy whatever applications are typical for our environment.
Yeah, so what you can do, you don't want to do OSD, you want to grab a machine, create the package cleans the machine, the package join it to your local domain, and it puts it in an OU. In that OU, you can run a startup script. The startup script installs the configuration manager client. Now, that means it goes from an unmanaged state to being a managed state. You can have different packages, depending on the type of computer, and you can run a PowerShell script in, so they set the WMI value or create a registry value, which you then can pick up by configuration manager. It says that this machine was provisioned using the package X, which means it's going to put it in the collection X, which means that it's now assigning the following applications to that device. So creating those things isn't really complicated or hard at all. So that's one way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
We've also automated that with the co-management capabilities and autopilot so that you can join it to AD, join it to AAD, have it managed by Intune, have it managed by Config Manager with minimal configuration effort.
Yeah, we added in 1706 the ability to bootstrap the SCCM agent from Intune. It would also work from a provisioning package. Use CCM setup.msi. A new version of CCM setup basically will bootstrap so it can run from Intune. Shameless plug, my session on Tuesday, 3075, I demoed exactly that autopilot all the way through to SCCM. So if you didn't see it, I'd encourage you to go and check it out and see how you can go in that modern way, modern provisioning, but still end up with that traditional managed device, which, as Mike says, is an entry point into co-management, which then gives you the ability to start looking towards the cloud.
Yeah, adding to that as well, one thing that the OEMs they're a bit lazy at is updating the actual firmware on the devices. So you might get a device that you buy that has really new, shiny Windows running on it, but it runs a really old firmware. So you wouldn't want to put it into a healthcare system with that, especially certain vendors like Intel. I've had a lot of issues lately around their ME engine, which is about as secure as, you provided a null password and you're admin. Yeah. So make sure you patch them as well. And there's nothing wrong with, the good old-fashioned OSD if you have a good process as well, because make sure you get the latest firmware, get the machine onto it, etc. So
where are we at now? I think this will need to be the last question because we're about out of time.
We're also in healthcare. And one of the questions that came up with me was, we've been hearing so much about the autopilot, stop doing images, but what happens if that machine gets hit by malware?
Yeah, with the malware case, you can still reset the PC. Windows will happily rebuild itself, and most malware will be wiped out by that process. Okay. If you have secure boot, I would take it further and say all malware would be knocked out by that process.
That's the other thing we're looking at Windows 10. The other concern we're having with that is, with the twice yearly updates, the login time. It doesn't look good to the patients when the doctor or nurse comes in there and, oh, we have to wait a couple minutes for me to log in because we just updated.
Yeah, and we're working on that to reduce the amount of time that it takes to do the feature updates altogether, as well as reducing the time that it takes to do that initial logon after each one of those. You'll see that continue to get better with each feature update that we do. It may take another 3 or 4 before we get it to a point where you would say it's minimally invasive, but for right now, it is a bit of extra time.
Thank you.
Let's squeeze in one more just so that we don't skip a microphone.
So this question builds off the question the gentleman had over there. I love the concept of autopilot. However, for customers who have numerous line of business apps, which includes many prerequisites as C++ redistributables, is a thought that we just recreate all that process in Intune for modern management. We would essentially be delivering 40 to 50 packages from Intune, and the device really wouldn't be, available and usable while while we customize that box for that user. So it seems like some companies would be better off still imaging a device still. Is the eventual goal to get rid of SCCM completely and go to Intune? I mean, for people who have like these large app install type scenarios, they have to be installed in a particular order. Where do you guys see that in terms of this modern management vision?
I might need a second just to process all that. So as I said to the gentleman earlier, the move to modern management is not just about technology. It's about adopting modern approaches across the board. And applications is probably the biggest and will most likely be the last for most customers, because we have customers that we speak to that we're working through the modern and co-management approaches with, and they have 1,300 plus applications in their environment that they need to figure out what the hell they're going to do with. So co-management is that bridge to allow them to continue doing what they've been doing for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whilst at the same time modernizing their processes to move to cloud services and cloud software. We've even got some customers that are so focused on moving to the cloud that they're pushing all of their vendors to give them a solution that works in an MDM modern managed world. But co-management will be that bridge for the foreseeable future to allow customers to have that best of both worlds. Traditional management with SCCM, but move to the modern for those workloads that they can. And I've got a feeling there was an aspect of your question that I've missed over, so.
Yeah, I would also say that an application with 17 dependencies is kind of the definition of a non-modern application.
Yeah. The other thing about modern management and moving to modern of Windows 10 is that if you compare it to that modern device world where mobile devices are they're just things, that the ownership and the management of the mobile devices is very different to what customers do today with laptops and Windows devices in general. So modern is more about bringing that in line. And to the question earlier about how, what do we do in that situation of break fix, it's more of that disposable scenario. And a lot more devices these days, you don't have the ability to peel off the little rubber feet, take the screws out and dig in and fix it. If it breaks, it breaks. You send it back to the manufacturer, or you go, shucks, and you buy another one. So it's about changing that mindset from, we really need to own and look after this device, to this device serves a purpose. If it breaks, the user gets a new one, and they go through the same provisioning process to get back to where they need to be.
I work with a couple of weapons manufacturers and some kind of agencies that you can't say. They don't have cloud. They will never, ever connect to any kind of cloud, ever. It's just, that's the way it is. And they're going to keep on using the traditional way to manage and deploy the machines. And as far as I know, that's going to work for the next, 20 years. I'm going to be dead and buried before traditional IT vanish. We still have customers running NT4. They should not, but they do, for various reasons. So the modern management is for the masses, but it's always going to be customers that say, we can't do that. There are reasons for that. And I don't really think that Microsoft is going to go like, oh no, we're not going to sell to those major companies anymore. So I will be very surprised if that is vanished. However, it might not be developed anymore. So new features may show up in the modern way of managing it. But there's no reason to remove all the old stuff.
Yeah, I guess that was the bit that I thought I'd miss. SCCM is not going anywhere. SCCM, if you were in Brad's keynote, he was very happy to announce that we have 100 million monthly active managed devices in SCCM. That's just a staggering number of devices. SCCM will continue to be a very popular management tool for a very long time, and we will continue to allow customers to run in that traditional way. Co-management and modern management is about enabling those customers that want to go to a modern management mechanism so that they can. Previously, we had a really poor story there. As I said at the beginning, you had to start from scratch in the cloud. Now we give you that bridge so that you can start to move it. And more customers are starting to move, including some of the sneaky beaky customers. They will eventually move. We're seeing it already. They will definitely move, but it will be, I'll be quite grey by the time that happens, I'm sure.
And with that, we need to wrap it up. If there were any questions that we didn't answer, don't let us out of the room until we do. But we need to get off the stage to let the next guys get set up. So thanks for attending.